Hi, my name is John Beck, Esri Law Enforcement Manager, and I'm joined today by Chris Delaney from our Patterns and Practices team. In this edition of our law enforcement webinar series, we'll be discussing ArcGIS expressions with Python, Arcade, and SQL, and we're going to give you some tips and techniques to help you on your way to becoming a master of syntax for crime analysis workflows. We're going to start by giving you an overview of expressions, discussing what they are, how to use them for crime analysis, and where to use them in your ArcGIS environment. Chris will then give us examples and demos of each. Finally, we're going to cover some resources for you to explore expressions further. During the webinar, as always, feel free to ask questions in the chat window. We'll answer as many as we can during the webinar or at the end of the webinar, or if we run out of time, we'll respond to you directly with an answer to your questions. Chris, what is an expression?
Thanks, John, and thank you everyone for coming to today's webinar. The first place we want to start off is level setting on what is an expression as it relates to ArcGIS. An expression is simply a combination of items, constants, variables, operators, and functions that are organized together in an ordered statement. So do this thing, then this thing, and then this thing, that return some kind of output value. And so those items that are part of an expression can be things like, in the example on this slide, a variable. So this is a field name for a field. In this case, it's a street number field, and that can vary from feature to feature to feature. So one street number can be 10, one street number can be 3, one street number can be 1035. You get the idea. You have operators that are part of expressions. Operators can be arithmetic operators, pluses, minuses, division, subtraction. They can also be logical operators, so conditional statements, and or all those kinds of things. You have constants. In most instances for crime analysts, constants tend to be specific string text. In this particular instance, we have a space surrounded by double quotes. And then we also have a function here at the end. This function references a variable called street name, and it applies a function called strip. The strip function in Python removes trailing or leading spaces from any variable. So taken all together, this expression in Python is a commonly utilized expression for crime analysts for concatenation. We're combining a street number variable with a space and a street name variable to create a complete address. And we're stripping extra spaces that might exist on the street name address. This is an example of what a simple expression might look like in Python. But what's most important to know is that expressions are unique to the computer language that they're created in. So the different syntax in terms of what defines a variable, what operators are available, how to describe a constant, the different functions that are available as part of that expression language. Those syntaxes define what constitutes a valid expression, and depending on the language, there are different functions and operators available to you. So how do we use expressions in crime analysis? There's basically 4 main areas in the ArcGIS platform that we use expressions in crime analysis. First, to query data, where we are using an expression to build complex queries to return a subset of data. Say I'm interested in being able to understand firearm crimes on 3rd Platoon. Or maybe I'm creating dynamic queries relative to a current date. I have an ArcMap project and I want to see the last 30 days of crimes, but I don't want to have to enter in the date range of 30 days every single time I open the project. I want that to automatically be calculated for me. Expressions are also utilized in calculations, most commonly for date transformations. From a date time field, I want to be able to extract some date part so that I can use it as part of my analysis or visualization. Maybe I want to create a month field or an hour field or a day of week or a day of week field from a date time field. Analysts often utilize calculation expressions to do that kind of work. They also may have to do some data manipulation where data extracted from a records management system or some other database doesn't come in the appropriate data type. So you have to recast data from a text value into a numeric or to a date value. Concatenation and parsing is another common expression need for crime analysts, where we're doing things like I just referenced, bringing together parts of an address to create a complete address. That's concatenation. Or maybe we need parts of an address, or parts of a code value that has both the UCR major type and then a subtype, and so we need to parse out subportions of a particular field. And then lastly, we use calculation expressions to perform calculations, particularly to generate things like crime rate or percent change from current year to previous year, current period to previous period, or then to do things like calculating averages. We also use expressions in labeling. Currently, you can utilize concatenation or parsing to create custom labels in ArcMap by bringing together different fields. But a new capability that's recently been introduced to the ArcGIS platform enables you to perform on-the-fly calculations for creating labels. So the ability to not only bring in particular fields, but to perform calculations on those fields in the fly. So instead of having to do a calculation, create a new field, and calculate it in order to display a rate or a percent change, you can perform that calculation as a label on the fly, which is a powerful new capability that's been recently introduced to the ArcGIS platform. Likewise, symbology expressions are a brand new capability that enables you to generate symbology on the fly in the same way we just talked about labeling, that you can perform calculations, date transformations on the fly without having to go add a new field, calculate the field, and then symbolize off of that field. So where do these different types of expressions exist, and what kind of expression language do we utilize for each? Well, for query expressions, almost universally we're using SQL, structured query language. And you'll find SQL expressions being written in two particular tools in ArcGIS. You'll see it in the Select by Attribute tool, and you'll also see it in the Definition Query tool. The Select by Attribute tool enables you to select some subset of your data so that you can then perform additional operations on it, or you can extract that data. The Definition Query filters your data for visualization purposes. Calculation expressions can be found in a couple of different languages depending on the product in the ArcGIS platform that you're using. For most of you who are already using ArcMap, you have two options. You have the ability to create calculation expressions in VB script and in Python. But moving forward to ArcGIS Pro, calculation expressions are only available using Python. So that's why we're going to be covering a couple of commonly utilized Python expressions during this webinar. And then in ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise, you can also perform some calculation expressions in the map viewer, and that is utilizing primarily SQL. So you'll find all of these capabilities, depending on the product, available in the field calculator. When it comes to labeling expressions, there's a variety of options depending on the product as well. If you're using ArcMap, you can create labeling expressions using either Python, JScript, or VB script. In ArcGIS Pro, you can use Python, JScript, or VB script. And you can also use a brand new scripting language called Arcade. Arcade is important because it will ultimately enable you to take expressions seamlessly from a desktop environment to a WebGIS environment. We'll talk about that more later. And as you can see, that is the only scripting language for labeling expressions that is accessible in ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise. And you'll find labeling expressions expressed in a couple of places. The label expression dialog box under the label tab on your local desktop, or in the custom expression tool in the web map viewer if you're using ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. And lastly, symbology expressions. Currently, ArcMap does not support symbology expressions. It's a new capability, as I mentioned. They are now available in ArcGIS Pro and ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise using Arcade, and you'll find them either in the symbology expression builder in ArcGIS Pro or as a custom expression in the web map viewer. So now let's talk a little bit about some of the basics of SQL query expressions, and we'll talk about a few examples. And just before I start, I just wanted to mention that all of the examples that we'll be using will be crime analysis specific and have been really chosen because of the most common types of things that we see analysts dealing with regard to these types of expressions. And so you'll notice that most of these expressions are oriented around managing date-time values. We often find that analysts really struggle to be able to manipulate date-time fields in ArcGIS effectively. And so we've really focused in this particular webinar on how you can either through querying, calculation, symbology, or labeling expressions, you can make use of your ArcGIS date-time fields that have been properly formatted and take advantage of some of the capabilities that expressions enable. So just a couple of basic SQL essentials. As we mentioned, you'll find SQL expressions, the ability to write them in either the select by attribute tools or definition queries. And the experience of writing them will vary depending on the kind of data that you're using. For instance, how variables get defined, and this by variables I mean field names in your data, will differ depending on the source of the data. If you're using a file geodatabase or a SQL server, there won't be any kind of brackets or quotation marks around your field names. They will just be as plain language. If you're using shapefiles, you'll see double quotes around them, and if you're using a personal geodatabase, you'll see brackets. And so that structure informs the type of source of data that you're working with. As you work with string data in SQL, you'll always find that string data has single quotes attached to it. The operators that are available for expressions in SQL are pretty common. So you'll find standard arithmetic operators, an asterisk for multiplication, a slash for division, pluses and minuses for addition and subtraction. Comparison operators, you have all the standard greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. It's important to know that not equal to is the greater than and the less than sign back to back. You also have the ability to do betweens, exists, so that it exists anywhere inside your data set. You can do lists where you can use the in operator, and then each item that you're trying to, each value that you're trying to query for, subsequent with a comma. So item 1, comma, item 2, item, comma 3, etc., etc., etc. You've got is and null. You can support wildcard searching as well. Wildcard searching has a couple of different options. So you can do for trying to match single expressions. You can use single characters. You can use question marks or an underscore. For any number of characters, you can either use the asterisk or you can use a percent sign. If you want to try to match digits, you can also use the number sign to match one digit in a text string. And logical operators. Logical operators, pretty straightforward for SQL, and connects two individual expressions together, or evaluates that one is true or the other is true, and not negates any expression that you have defined. So you want essentially giving you the opposite of the expression that you've defined. So the date functions I mentioned, I'm going to focus primarily on date functions in SQL and the other expressions. One of the most common questions we get around expressions is, how do if I've got data and I've got my data automated, so let's say we've got part 1 crime data, and I've got a database and it's either local geodatabase or it's in a server, and that data is getting updated every single night. I want to be able to go see the last 7 days or yesterday or the last 30 days worth of crime in my ArcMap project, but I don't want to have to go in and manually set the date range query every single time I open up the project. You don't have to do that. There's a function in SQL that lets you do that. It's called current date. Current date gives you the ability to call the system date and then to set up an expression. In this case, I've got this little clip. I have an incident date time is greater than or equal to the current date minus 30. So you're setting the current date as a reference. You're telling the computer to go back 30 days from the current date, and you want any value that is greater than or equal to that time to be displayed. This also works for current time as well. This is probably one of the most important yet underappreciated functions that is accessible inside the ArcGIS platform, because it enables you to have your data refreshed for the date reference that you're interested in, and it just automatically works every time you open up the project, and your data is up to date and ready to go. Let's say you want to be able to take a component of a date out of a date time field. There's also a function for that as well. It's the extract function. The syntax of the extract function is essentially the word extract and then parentheses, and then I have to select the date part, and I can pick year, month, day, hour, minute, or second from, and then I select my field. So in this example, extract month from my report date field equals 12 would give me all crimes that were in December. So this is a way that I can query components of a date value without having to extract or create a separate field and then perform querying on that field. Just one last note around date data. It does behave differently depending on the data source that you're working with. As you bring a specific unique date into either definition query or select by attributes query, you'll see, depending upon the source of your data, the date behaves differently. For shapefiles, it will automatically put date and then in single quotations your date in a YYYY-MM-DD form. For file geodatabases in SQL Server, you'll see not only the date but also the time. So time data is not supported in a date time field in shapefiles. Well, it is supported in file geodatabases in SQL Server. And then in personal geodatabases, you'll just find a slightly different format. It'll be bracketed by hash marks, and then it'll be in an mm-dd-yyy form with the time information. So now let's take a look at a couple of those queries in action. I'm going to hop over really quickly to ArcMap, and I've got some data. Before I joined Esri, I previously worked at the Rochester, New York Police Department, so I often like to use a lot of Rochester data as an example. And this is some 2017 Part 1 crime data that I downloaded off of the Rochester Police Department's open data site. And I have all Part 1 crimes for 2017 here, but I would like to be able to just create a subset of this data that is just pulling the last 30 days of crime. So I'm going to turn this layer off. I'm going to make a copy of it, and I'm going to paste that layer into my table of contents, and I'm going to call it last 30 days. And I'll turn it on. Now I want to apply a definition query to this layer that enables me to just see the last 30 days. So I'm going to go to Properties after right-clicking, and I'm going to open up the Definition Query tab. Once I open up that Definition Query tab and I'm able to start building my query, I'm going to use that same current date function that we just talked about. So the query that I want to write is drawing from my incident date time value. I'm going to select that value. I want to pick all incidents that are greater than or equal to current underscore date minus 30. So that's 30 days from the current date, anything that's greater than or equal to that value. Press verify to test it. It has been successfully verified. And then I'm going to press OK and apply that value. Now I can see, obviously, I've seen a reduction in the number of events in my map, but if I open up the attribute table to verify this information, I can see that today is October 5th, and I pretty much have all data from September 2017. So this looks right on par with the query that I've just performed. Okay. So now I'm going to show an example of using the extract function in SQL to be able to pull out data that is only firearm crimes on 3rd platoon. So to do that, I'm going to go back to my Rochester Part 1 crime layer, and then I'm going to go up to Selection and pick the Select by Attribute tool. So I've been asked to grab all 3rd platoon firearm crimes. So the very first thing that I want to do is select all of the incidents that are in 3rd platoon. So to write that query, I'm going to scroll down and find my date time value. I'm going to double click it. And I'm going to say, I'm going to start to create an extract function, an extract expression from this particular value. So I'm going to use the extract function and open parentheses, and I want to extract hour from incident date time, where the hour is in a list of any of the hours that are part of 3rd platoon. So in Rochester, 3rd platoon starts at 3 p.m. and it runs until 11 p.m. So I'll start selecting hours 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22. So those are the hours that would comprise a 3rd platoon shift. And now I also want to be able to bring in all my firearm crime. So then I'll write and to connect that expression to a second expression to create a compound expression. In this case, I need to select where my weapon description, again, I'm going to do another list, is in, and then an open parentheses, and then I'm going to get the unique values for my weapon description. I'm going to select firearm, comma, fully automatic handgun, fully automatic rifle, comma, revolver, comma, semi-automatic handgun, comma, semi-automatic rifle, shotgun, single shot pump action or bolt action rifle, and then close parentheses. Now there's one other thing that I want to exclude out of here. New York state law has a menacing charge that is threats using firearms. I'm not interested in threats using firearms. I'm only interested in actual firearm related crimes. So I want to get rid of those menacings. So I'm going to go up to my statute description field, and I'm going to add one more expression to add to this compound expression, and statute description not like, and then I'm going to use a single quote, and I'm going to use an asterisk, MENAC, and then I'm going to have another asterisk and another single quote. So what I've done is I'm going to look for any statute that is not like menacing. So I'm using MENAC to grab all of those, and I'm evaluating whether or not that does not have a value of menacing anywhere in the statute description field. So now I can verify this. Oh, I must have forgotten to put close a parenthesis here somewhere. So what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to make sure that I have proper parentheses on each of my sub-expressions here. And then we will test this to make sure it works again. Oh, I still have too many parentheses. I must have added a parenthesis here somewhere that I didn't belong. So let me just look at this very quickly. I'm sure some of you guys have already figured out exactly where my parenthesis mistake is. There we go. Oh, third time was not the charm. So this is the challenge of writing expressions on live webinars. Extract. Okay. Let me just delete these ones that I just added in.
First person to point it out in the chat window wins a prize.
Yes, thank you. Hour from date and time.
Comma between shotgun and single shot. Oh, there it is. See?
Shotgun and single shot. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, we're still not
Brandon.
right. We missed. Thanks, Brandon.
Oh no.
We got the right idea here though. So I'm not gonna get too caught up in it, but I think you guys got the right idea. I'm gonna delete the whole complicated piece here, and we'll just show the extract value so you can see it. That one's successfully verified. We won't worry about it anymore. And that enabled us to pull just the third platoon values. So you can see that you can use that extract hour from incident date time, and you can also apply month, you can apply minute, you can apply weekday from there. You've got a bunch of different options, year, so it's a powerful way to be able to pull out sub portions of your overall date time field. So that's a couple of examples around Python. The next thing that I want to talk about, or if that's a few examples around SQL, the next thing I want to talk about is calculation expression. And before we go any further, I just want to do a quick poll of everyone who's participating in the webinar. So if we can put poll number 1 up. For those of you who are active ArcGIS users, ArcMap users, what is the current scripting language that you're currently using in Field Calculator? As you can see, we've got 3 options in our poll. You can select either VBScript, you can select Python, or maybe you have no idea what Field Calculator is. So if you can take just a minute to answer the poll, and we'll get a sense of who's currently using which scripting language to support their calculation activities in the ArcGIS platform. Okay, so if we can close the poll now. And the poll results will be coming up in just 1 minute. We can see that most of you are currently using VBScript to do your field calculations. Some of you are using Python, and some of you have no idea what Field Calculator is. All of those are great answers. And those of you who are using VBScript, those are kind of the folks that in particular we wanted to make you aware of some of the expression capabilities around Python, because as you start to transition from ArcMap to the future of desktop GIS, ArcGIS Pro, VBScript is no longer supported as a calculation expression. So it's important that that you start to learn Python, because it's the mechanism by which you'll have to do those kinds of expressions moving forward. Okay, so if we can hide those results now, and we can move on. So a couple of essentials about Python. As I mentioned, you'll use this in Field Calculator, and moving forward in Pro, it's the only Field Calculator language that you'll be able to use. In contrast to SQL, where depending upon the value type, you might have a different way that field names are expressed. In Python, all field names are surrounded by exclamation points, and Python is also case sensitive. When we're doing things like concatenating and parsing, it's actually quite simple in Python. The only thing that you need to do to join fields together for concatenation is adding plus marks between the fields, and then just make sure that you're also including spaces with double quotes around them, so you have a space between each of your fields. Otherwise, it's very easy to do in Python. Date transformations are a little bit trickier. You might have been used to using things like the month function in VBScript, or date diff or date part. You no longer have things access to things that are quite that simple. There's one particular line of expression that you need to know when you're transforming a date in Python, and that is arcpy.time.parseDateString. Then you put in your field, and then you use a function called strftime, and then in parentheses you have a bunch of different options for how you want to parse out time. And so you'll see the different strft time codes available on this image to the right of the slide. There's all sorts of different codes that are available. You can express a date time as a weekday in either its full name, as a number, as an abbreviated name. You can express months as complete names or partial names, or as a number.
Hey,
you've
Chris,
got, yes.
we're looking at your Python calculation expression screen. Can you make sure you're, there we go, perfect.
Okay, so thank you, Brenda. Sorry about that, guys. So for those of you who aren't able to see my screen previously, on the right-hand side are all of the strft time codes that are part of the primary function that you utilize to perform date transformations, which you'll see down here: arcpy.time.parseDateTimeString, your field variable, .strftime, in parentheses, the particular strft time code. So that's really the big one that we wanted you to learn in this exercise. And in addition, if you wanted to be able to, you needed to be concatenating values together, but one of your values is not a text value, you can utilize the string function in Python to be able to convert it as part of your calculation. So in this case, I maybe want to create a value that is combining a constant, which is the word beat, together with a field that contains my car beat number as a number that I want to convert to string, so that I'm able to create a value, a text value that says beat and then the car beat number. One other thing that I want to be able to show very quickly if we have time, because it is, again, one of the most commonly asked things that questions that we get, is how you manage converting data that's in a text format into an ArcGIS date time format. This is not a Python function per se. The underlying code is Python, but there's actually a tool in the data management toolbox called the convert time field that will take any text value that you have and turn it into an appropriate ArcGIS date time field. So let's take a look at a couple of those examples. I'm going to hop back into my ArcMap example. And we're going to open up our data. And let's take a look at the data in my Part 1 crime layer. If I scroll all the way to the right-hand side, I can see my incident date time value. Maybe one thing that I want to do with this data first is I want to be able to calculate a month value off of this field. To do that, I would go to the table options. I'm going to create a new field. It's going to be a short integer, and I'm going to call it month. So now I have my new field. And then if I want to perform a calculation on this field, I right-click it, and I open up the field calculator. In the field calculator, I can see it. I have two options, VBScript or Python. We're going to work in Python. And I'm going to start to enter in that function that I just described to you. So it's arcpy.time.P parse, capital D date, capital T time, capital S string, and then open parentheses, and then I'm going to select my incident date time value. When I double click it to bring it into the expression, it automatically adds the exclamation points. And then I'm going to close parentheses, add a period, and type in strftime, open parentheses, single quote, %, capital A, single quote, close parenthesis. And that %A is the code that will enable me to return back a month value. And as I mentioned, you have an entire array of different codes that you can draw from. We'll make that list available in a link as a resource link for you at the end of the presentation. So now I can apply this, and it's going to calculate my records, and I'm going to get back that month variable off of my incident date time field. If you'd like to be able to get access to that field as we're waiting for this to calculate, you can find this entire list at strftime.org. Shows the entire list of all of the different codes that are available for converting a date time field into date parts. Oh. I've had a geoprocessing error. Let me take a look at what my issue was. My value type is incompatible with my field type. So I might have added the wrong type of field. So I'm going to delete that. And I really needed, that's right, because what I'm adding is a text field. I added the wrong type of field. So rather than a short integer, I'm going to add a text field. I'm going to call that month. And then we'll run this again using field calculator. You can see I already have the expression that I wrote here ready to go. We'll rerun that, and that'll give us back the right value. So that's an important thing to know as you're thinking about what value you want to calculate, is what output are you hoping to get? Depending upon the code that you put in as part of that expression, you're going to return back text or you're going to return back numbers. So as you're adding a field before you're doing your calculations, you have to know what format you're expecting your data to return back in. So after we run this, we're just going to show really quickly an example of how you utilize the calculate date field to be able to convert a text field into a date time field. So once this runs, we'll be able to take a look at a couple of other fields in this data set that are dates that are expressed as time, and then we'll be able to go into Arc Toolbox and go to the data management tool set and utilize that calculate date field to be able to convert a certain date expressed in a text format with a specific structure into that date time field. So this is almost done calculating, and we'll have that value to be able to show. And then once we've completed that, then we'll move on to showing a couple of the ways in which arcade expressions can help develop custom symbology and custom labeling expressions for you. So this is just about done. And we can see that we now have our month value, and it's a full day a week value associated with the incident date time on our value on our ArcGIS date time field. So that's a powerful way to be able to calculate new values off of a date time field. If I scroll back, I can see that I have some timestamp values here. So if I didn't have an active, valid date time field, and I only had gotten out of my database extract a date field that was in some kind of text format like this, I can go to Arc Toolbox, and I can open up the Calculate Date Time tool. ArcMap's running a little slow for me today, so give me just a minute. Okay, ArcMap's hanging on me, so I'm going to move ahead to the next set of slides, and then we'll come back to this in a minute if we have a chance. So the next place that I want to go, and as ArcMap unhangs, I'll be able to show you the second piece of that demonstration. But the next place that I want to go to is Arcade, and this is where we can add in our second poll. Arcade is a brand new set of capabilities that have just been added as of this summer to ArcGIS. Just out of curiosity, before you joined this webinar, did you have a sense of what Arcade was? Had you heard of Arcade? So if you can take a minute to answer our poll, what is Arcade? Before you joined this webinar, was an arcade a fun place to play video games? You have no idea, that's why you're here, or an expression language for labeling in symbology? Just curious to know which of you are previously or aware of Arcade in the ArcGIS platform, and which of you for whom this is a brand new language and expression experience. Give the poll one more minute. Okay, and we can shut the poll down now, and we'll see what our results come back with. So our poll results are, this looks like many of you were previously familiar with Arcade. That's great. Glad to see you guys are up to speed on what's going on with Arcade, or at least aware of it. And then about 40% of you have no idea, and another 21% of you thought it was a fun place to play video games. Factually correct. So many of you not familiar with Arcade. That's great. We can close the poll now. Thank you. And then let's go back to start to talk about Arcade and get you up to speed on what it is and why it matters to the ArcGIS platform. So Arcade is an exciting new expression language. It helps you do custom symbology, custom labels, and custom pop-ups. It is essentially a variant of JavaScript, but it's got some special components to it that make it not only completely secure, so it can't be subject to injection attacks, but also portable, so that from a desktop environment to a web environment, you're able to seamlessly exchange expressions that are applied to layers and maps. And you'll be able to use it not only in ArcGIS Pro, but also in ArcGIS Online and Enterprise Map Viewer. And essentially, its key benefit for you is that it eliminates the need to have to calculate new fields like what we just saw in the previous exercise, just simply for the purposes of visualization or to be able to generate labels or generate pop-ups, that you can now do that on the fly instead of having to build a new value. Where will you find Arcade? Well, in the Web Map Viewer in ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. You'll find it for symbology under the control symbology icon in red. When you open that up, under the first drop-down for choose an attribute to show, if you open up that drop-down and scroll all the way to the end, you'll see a little option that says New Expression. You select that, and that will open up the expression window for creating custom symbology. How would you use Arcade in crime analysis? Well, you could write a expression that enables you to, if you had the date and time in which a call for service occurred, and then the date and time in which an officer arrived on scene, you can use it to symbolize by response time, or to be able to do 5-year averages, or to be able to do a rate or percent change. You can utilize it in ArcGIS Pro to modify your labels so that they can have a new line, so you can have multiple fields on multiple lines. That capability is not quite there yet in ArcGIS Enterprise, ArcGIS Online, and ArcGIS Enterprise, but will be soon. It is currently supported in ArcGIS Pro, though. And for dynamically changing date time fields into date parts, so some of the other things that we just saw in SQL and in Python are now available to do on the fly in Arcade for labels and symbology. Okay, so let's take a look at Arcade in action. The first place we're going to go to take a look at Arcade is in ArcGIS Pro. I've got 5 years worth of calls for service data for assaults from Jones Creek, Georgia. And what I really like about this data that's publicly available on their open data website is that this calls for service data provides all of the key date time values associated with the call. So the date time of the call, the date time an officer got en route, date time the officer arrived, and the date time the incident was cleared. this enables me to symbolize this data by response time. So let's do that. To symbolize this data by response time using an arcade expression, first I'm going to select this layer, and then if I go up to the ribbon tab for ArcGIS Pro and I select the appearance label, I can go to the symbology button, and that's going to open up the symbology pane. By default, my layer is a single symbol symbology, but I want to create a graduated symbol symbology whereby the calls with the longest response time are larger, so I can identify those. So I'm going to select graduated symbol symbology, and it automatically started to create one off of the one of the numeric fields that's already in my data, which is one of my X values. I'm not interested in that. I want to set an expression. And so that's going to open up the expression builder for me in ArcGIS Pro. And I'm going to write an expression. I'm going to delete the expression that's already here. The expression that I want to be able to calculate is the date difference, the date time difference between the date time of the call and the date time my officer arrived on scene. So I'm going to use first I'm going to call this expression response time. Then I'm going to go to my functions, and I'm going to select the date diff function. And then I'm going to put my cursor in between the parentheses. And then I'm going to select my date time arrival layer. I'm going to add a comma. And then I'm going to select my date time of the call field. And then how do I want the date difference to be expressed between these two values? I want it to be expressed in minutes. So I need to type in minutes, and you can do the same thing in hours, months, years. There's a variety, if you look at the help documentation, a variety of different units of time, of units of measurement that you can express the date difference in. I'll press my verify button to check that this works, and it says it's valid. I press OK, and then it's going to generate on-the-fly symbology that calculates response time. And I'm able to see already in my legend that I've got a natural breaks with 5 classes, where the largest events are over 54 minutes in response time, and the smallest are 4 minutes are under. So very quick and easy to be able to just symbolize off of custom calculations. Alternatively, if I didn't want to be able to do graduated symbols, maybe I want to be able to symbolize these by the day of the week that they occurred, I could use unique values and then create an expression based on the day of the week in which the event occurred. So going back to my expression builder, I can use the weekday function. If I scroll down here, first I'm going to call this day of week. If I scroll down to the weekday function, I can see the weekday function, and I can put my cursor in between the parentheses and select my call date time. Test that, press OK. And this will load a set of unique values based on the weekday associated with my date time. Now, one thing to note as this loads, it will return back the numeric values. So you do need to, when you're labeling, you need to to add actual plain language associated with the coded values. And the arcade weekday value codes are different than the weekday value codes that you might be used to working with in something like Microsoft Excel, where Sunday is equivalent to 1. In Arcade, Sunday is equivalent to 0. So it's slightly different than day of week codes that you might be used to dealing with. So ArcGIS Pro is loading. While we're waiting for that to load, I want to do one other thing, which is to let's play around with some labels. I'm going to zoom in over here just to focus on just a couple of points, and we're going to write a custom expression for labeling. We're going to select because we still have this layer selected, we can see there's a couple of options on our ribbon tab associated with our feature layer, and one of them is the labeling tab. So the labeling ribbon shows us a whole bunch of options. As our symbology finishes drawing, we're then able to call this up. Although it doesn't seem to want to be cooperating with me, of course. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong in the live demo. So that seems to be hung up on for me as well. So while I'm waiting for that to finish, I'm going to move ahead to another example of using Arcade. Oh, there, it finally worked for us. So I can see that my symbology for day of the week starts with 0 and ends with 6. So 0 is essentially Sunday. And now I can start to do some labeling. So in order to do some labeling, I can have my labeling ribbon, and I can see the ability to turn on labels right here. So if I turn on labels, it's going to label based on my object ID. Maybe I just want to have it labeled by incident number, and I can see some of those labels start to appear. But in this case, I want to have a more robust label. So I can write a label expression by clicking on the expression button. From here, I can create an expression that lets me do something along the lines of maybe I want to be able to show my incident number, and then I want to have in a new line my date and time of the call. So to create a new line, I have to use a function called text formatting dot new line, and then another plus, and then I can add my call date time. I can test that and apply this. And now I can see that I've got that. I've got my incident number, and then I have a call date time. But as you'll notice, this call date time is formatted kind of funky. It's got my date information, then it has my time, and then it has the addition for the time zone that I'm in, which is a standard format of how UTC times are formatted, which is the standard for ArcGIS. If we want to format this so it looks nice and clean, we can go back into our expression and we can add a little bit of additional work where we're going to convert that date time field to a text field. So we're going to use the text function, and then we're going to, after our date time field variable, add a comma, and then enter in the format that we want this data to be displayed as. So M for month / D for day, YY for year, comma, HHMM, single quote, close parentheses. Now basically what that is doing is applying to our date time field a format structure. So now you can see that format structure applied. So it's a little bit easier to read and easier to work with. Great. Okay, so one last thing that I want to show you with regard to Arcade is how it works in ArcGIS Online. Now I have a layer, and I'm in the map viewer in ArcGIS Online, and I have some Rochester robbery data by beat. If I open up one of these, I can see that I've got data on total population for that beat, and I also have counts of robberies by year. Maybe I'd like to do some symbology that looks at 5-year averages for robberies in each beat. To do that, I'd select the Change Style button, and I would click on the Choose Attribute to Show dropdown and go all the way to the bottom to create a new expression. That's going to open up the expression builder. And then I'm going to calculate an average. So to calculate an average, I'm going to go to Functions. I'm going to select the average function. I'm going to delete where it says Values and put my cursor in between the two parentheses. Then I'm going to go back to Globals so I can see my fields, and I'm just going to start adding my 5-year averages, my yearly counts. So 2012, comma, 2013, comma, 2014, comma, 2015, comma, and 2016. And then I'll press the test button. It returns a good value for me, and I can press OK. And then the resulting symbology is going to start to render, and I have different options on how to symbolize it, and I'll symbolize it by a graduated color map. So just like that, I'm able to generate a 5-year average by car beat based on underlying data without having to calculate the average and have it in a new field. So that's pretty cool. Another interesting example that I could apply is if I wanted to add labels in. I could hit the More Options button on my layer, and I could add in Create Labels. just like with the symbology, if I go on the drop down all the way to the bottom, I'll see the new expression option. And for here, maybe I want to be able to create a new, if I wanted to be able to pull an existing expression that I had already used, like the 5-year average, I could pull that in. Or if I wanted to write a new one, I could as well. So maybe I'll do a robbery rate for each car beat. So to do that, I'm going to do an open parentheses, and then I'm going to enter in the 2016 robbery field. So I'm going to do the robbery rate per car beat for 2016. I'm going to divide it by my population field. And then I'm going to multiply the whole thing by normalization value of 1,000 people, and I'll test that. And the result, as you see, it comes back with a lot of trailing digits. That's too busy for my label. So I'm going to add another feature, another function to this, which is the round function. So I can add in or just type in the round function. It shows me the syntax to apply, field or value, and then the number of places. So I'm going to delete that. And then I'm going to add in, I want to have one place and close my parentheses, test, and now I can see what the resulting value is. I can press OK. And now I have a 2016 robbery rate for each of my car beats. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so we're running out of time, so I want to move forward to just share a couple of references and resources. And don't worry if you don't have to scramble to be able to capture all these down or take a screenshot. We'll send these links out to you in a follow-up email at the end of the webinar. But these are all of the function reference guides for SQL, Python, and Arcade that you've got access to. That's the best place to go in and learn about the specific syntax for each of the expression languages. I showed you a couple simple examples, but there's a lot more that are available to you. Additionally, we'll also send out in the follow-up email a link to not only my PowerPoint presentation, but a cheat sheet and the example exercises that I showed in this exercise so that you can follow along and learn some of this on your own. I think we have time for maybe one quick question. I'm sorry I went a little long due to technical difficulties. John, is there maybe one question that popped out most from people?
Yeah, we kind of got a combined question.
Sure.
When will Arcade be available in ArcMap, if it will? And is ArcGIS Pro still going to support Python and SQL expressions?
Yeah, so let me take it last part of it first. So ArcGIS Pro supports SQL expressions for querying, just like ArcMap. ArcGIS Pro supports Python for field calculations, just like ArcMap. It does not support VBScript, and it supports Arcade for labeling and symbology. ArcMap, I'm not aware currently of plans for ArcMap to support Arcade. It's also important to know, if you're not already familiar, that ArcMap is being replaced by ArcGIS Pro as the flagship desktop GIS software by Esri. So this next release of ArcMap, which is the 10.6 release that will come out later this winter, will be the last major release of ArcMap with minimal new additional feature functionality. ArcMap will continue to be supported in the future, but all new feature functionality will continue to be focused on ArcGIS Pro. So now really is the time, if you haven't already started to think about ArcGIS Pro, to start to think about downloading ArcGIS Pro and starting to get comfortable with it. If you are on maintenance with an ArcGIS desktop license, you have access already to both ArcMap and ArcGIS Pro. So there should be no additional licensing for you, requirements associated for you. If you're already on maintenance, you get both already. As to the first, did I cover both parts of the question, John, or only the second part?
No, I think you did. You did.
Great.
So we're out of time. We got a lot of questions. If we didn't have time for yours, we'll respond to you directly. We have lots of public safety webinars for fire, emergency management, law enforcement, national security, and CAD 911. Our next law enforcement webinar will be December 7th, and we'll be covering an introduction to drone to map for law enforcement. Cool stuff. If you want to reach out to Chris or I directly, here's our information. Chris, there you go. Go ahead and we're very responsive. Send us an email, and we'd love to chat with you and answer your questions. Thanks, Chris. Thanks all for attending this month's law enforcement webinar. Have a good day.